Chapter 10. Hemp and Folk Religion. I wonder if Yue, the moon, is heading safely to the west, the Emperor mused to Gaoxuan as they gazed up at the bright disk floating in the sky. His Majesty was not, of course, asking whether the actual moon would safely make its rounds. Rather, it was a familiar nickname for a certain important personage, albeit a nickname that no one in the nation other than His Majesty used. They were planning to stop and inspect the papermaker's village on the way, so I would guess they're only about halfway there. With the eunuch Jinshi gone, Gaoxuan had returned to the personal service of the emperor. For generations, the Ma family had been the protectors of the flower of the nation, and Gaoxuan had been the emperor's companion since they were young men together, much as his son Basen now was for another. He'd often played hide-and-seek with His Majesty and another milk sibling, but the end of youth had put a stop to such games. Now it was Basen who guarded the one known as Yue. Gaoxuan had always wondered if perhaps he should have chosen his other son for the role, but he had given it to the younger boy. Basen was inexperienced, yes, but everyone had at least one redeeming quality. Gaoxuan's concerns had only intensified after Basen had failed Yue on their last expedition, but they did have the young apothecary with them. That was reassuring. She was nothing if not bold. Gaoxuan's argument to his son had been that they should take the young woman because it would be disastrous if there were to be any incidents of poisoning on this trip. Eventually, he had talked the boy around. As for the Moon Prince, he had agreed without a second thought. He'd known the apothecary herself would eventually acquiesce, even if it involved a lot of grumbling, and the doctor from the rear palace would be with them on at least half the trip. The young woman acted like she didn't think much of the doctor with his slight mustache, but Gaoxuan happened to know that in fact they got along quite well. The real concern was what they were going to do in the western capital after they parted ways with the physician. "I don't suppose it will be easy for him," the emperor remarked. "I wonder what flowers will gather to him." "Gathering flowers, sire? An interesting choice of metaphor." "Well, they'd probably get angry if I compared them to insects. A glance at my garden should explain." He was just kidding. A joke he could make, perhaps, because they were in not the rear palace, nor the palace proper occupied by the Empress Dowager or the current Empress, but rather a villa beyond the imperial court that was currently the residence of Aduo, formerly one of the emperor's 4 ladies, as well as his milk sibling and a friend to him and Gaoxuan when all of them were young. If the emperor looked a little lonely, perhaps it was because Aduo was not here, for she too had gone to the west, and in the company of one particular person. The Moon Prince, meanwhile, was not as flowery as his appearance might suggest. Gaoxuan, who had been with him from his youth, had spent more time with him than either his mother or his father, knew better than anyone. The prince was a remarkably direct person, uninterested in ostentation. Even now that his tenure at the rear palace was over, however, they would continue to require his help and effort, for now he must serve as the emperor's younger brother, doing all those things the sovereign, who couldn't leave the capital, could not do himself. So, a plague of insects. A natural disaster which could, potentially, bring an entire country to ruin. Perhaps the note of sadness in the emperor's voice came from the sense that this was a reflection on his impotence as ruler, if only in the eyes of his more superstitious subjects. It had been he who had chosen to destroy the Shi clan, and had then taken Consort Gyokyo, one of the 4 ladies, as his empress. Insect plagues often began with grasshoppers who came in on the wind from the west, from hundreds or even thousands of li away. The bugs would flourish in their new home, and what started as a bit of a nuisance, if left unchecked, would grow into positive destruction in the years to come. Perhaps they were worrying too much, but they had to do something about it, and it was the Prince of the Moon who had been entrusted with the task. This plague of insects would become a problem for more than just Li, however. If the grasshoppers came from the west, it meant they would wreak their destruction there as well. Hunger drove people to desperation. Starving farmers would turn to brigandage. As such troubles mounted, they would eventually lay waste to the state, and a wasted state would try to steal from its richer neighbors. It had been the cause of many a war in times past. The Yi clan, which had ruled the western regions including Sei Shu, or the Western Yi province, had been exterminated decades before, during the time of the Empress Regnant. Their own machinations had led to their destruction, and now the area was ruled by Empress Gyokyo's father. As things stood, the man was without a clan name, but it was likely the emperor would bestow one upon him in due time. Indeed, he had originally planned to grant the family a name and then make Gyokyo his empress. If a war ever did break out, the West would be crucial. That was why he had chosen a lady from that region as his empress. He could well understand why some people felt the move was premature, even though Gyokyo had already borne him first a princess and now a prince. The place might ordinarily belong by rights to consort Lihua, but marriage was a political tool, one whose use became ever more stringently dictated the higher one's position was. The emperor might stand at the zenith of his nation, yet even he sometimes had to consider what would please his father-in-law. The fact that he could be heard to grumble about all this in Gaoshun's presence was perhaps a demonstration of how much he trusted the man. The emperor playfully held up his wine cup and chuckled. "It can't hurt you to know from time to time your monarch's sufferings." He gazed up at the moon, then drained his cup in a single gulp. Gaoshun looked off into the distance, thinking mournfully of the lovely man who was now far to the west. To the northwest of Li, there was a country called Hokuaren. It possessed extensive grainlands and forest resources, and had a history of being at loggerheads with Li. It was urging from Hokuaren that had prompted the recent spate of attacks by barbarian tribes against Li. Diplomatic relations between the two countries were nil. They didn't communicate directly, and when they did have contact with each other, it was always with a third country acting as intermediary. Why are we speaking of all this now? Because of the western capital, the place Mau Mau was heading at that very moment. There, discussions would be held with important people from other countries, people who could offer indirect connections to Hokuaren. "I never imagined we would be going to the western capital," Mau Mau thought. She'd felt like her jaw might drop clear through the floor when she'd been informed of their ultimate destination, after leaving the quack village behind. It would take more than 2 weeks' travel by carriage and boat to reach the western capital. She started to worry about Chou and Sazen, whom she'd left behind. But then she concluded, they'll work it out. Her getting all upset wasn't going to change anything, so she put it out of her mind. Instead, she would have to try to get Jinshi to spend as much money on her during the trip as possible. Anyhow, this was why she found herself being lectured about politics by a rather insistent Basen. Come to think of it, this wasn't the first time he'd tried to explain such things. It occurred to her that he was actually pretty well educated, at least as far as it went. Not an entirely respectful way to think of it, but oh well. She stifled a yawn and tried to listen. They'd left the quack doctor and Mau Mau the cat back in the paper village, and they had a long road ahead of them. Jinshi, meanwhile, was still running around with that fake burn on his cheek. Maybe he'd grown fond of it. It was probably easier than having to wear a mask every time they stopped at some roadside inn for the night. They were far enough from the capital by now that Mau Mau thought no one was likely to recognize the face of the imperial younger brother, but considering how much trouble it would be to have every young lady on the street catcalling him as they walked along, she decided to leave well enough alone. "We will stay at this village tonight," Basen said. Mau Mau got out of the carriage, rubbing her behind, which was sore from sitting all day. The place was less a village than a small inn town, but to Basen these rustic outposts were probably indistinguishable. "Don't wander," he added. Mau Mau responded by sticking out her hand. "I'm going to go buy provisions." "And you're going to give me the money for it," she clearly meant. "Are you even listening to me?" Basen demanded, glowering at her. However, someone else dropped a coin purse into Mau Mau's hand. Jinshi. Basen started, but managed to stop himself before he said, "Master Jinshi." The bodyguards with them seemed to be under the impression that Basen was the master here. "I'll accompany her," Jinshi said in his altered voice. "Son of a..." Mau Mau thought, glaring at the young man with the burn. Here she'd been hoping for a chance to just relax. "Are they selling anything interesting?" Jinshi asked, whispering in her ear so no one else would overhear him. His voice was so beautiful it threatened to give her goosebumps, yet it contained an almost boyish curiosity. It was like the last time they'd gone to a city market together. People raised in the lap of luxury got excited about the strangest things. "It appears hemp production is a major industry here," Mau Mau replied. It seemed to be the main material of the people's clothing. Maybe it wasn't enough to keep them warm, for many also wore animal skins, and flax seeds were used in the bread sold in the bakeries as well. The area also produced oil, it seemed, for she could see pots filled with a viscous liquid. That might be the oil maker sitting nearby, smoking a pipe. Mau Mau noted that he was smoking dried hemp leaves and frowned. "What is it?"
"Nothing. I just think maybe he's smoking too much."
The product of the hemp plant could be used in small quantities as medicine, but smoking it on a daily basis could create an addiction, and wasn't something Mau Mau would recommend. Much like opium, it could be medicinal if used sparingly, but it was toxic in larger quantities. "So there are toxins even you won't touch," Jinchi said teasingly. Mau Mau looked annoyed.
"Addictive substances are not to be trifled with. There's no way to get the poison out of your system, and even if you want to quit, doing so is harder than getting out from under the covers on a cold winter morning."
"You think? That's not so difficult if the room is warm." "Shit, that's right." He didn't understand plebeian metaphors, Mau Mau realized. No doubt Jinchi's old attendant lit a brazier to warm the room before he woke. What an awful master he was, to run his old servant Suiren ragged that way. And when he didn't even understand the effort involved. Mau Mau found herself inadvertently scowling at him. Now there's a look I haven't seen in a while," Jinchi said, not at all bothered. In fact, he looked so gratified that Mau Mau wondered if he was quite all right. If Gaoxun were here, no doubt he would have been pressing his hand to his forehead and giving Mau Mau a significant look. Jinchi's current companion, Basen, however, didn't have the opportunity. He was busy making preparations at the moment. They would be heading into a much drier region, and they needed horses that were accustomed to the environment. Although they had been changing mounts every day, apparently this was going to involve some entirely new type of horse. It was just a speck of a town, just a few dozen houses scattered around a prominent inn, but a highway passed through the area, and allegedly they would be able to obtain the animals. It would take a bit of time, though, to get enough horses together for the carriage as well as all the bodyguards.
"Personally, I'm more interested in buying provisions," Mau Mau said, looking at the bread displayed at the storefront.
Much of it was fried, perhaps owing to the local oil production. Specifically, it was a fried and twisted dough treat known as mahua, or hemp flour, a most appropriate name. "Includes flax seeds," proclaimed a sign by the bread. The fried dough would keep a long time, and more importantly, Jinchi was obviously very interested in it.
"I wonder if it'll suit a noble's tastes."
Mau Mau was skeptical, but she nonetheless turned to the old man industriously working his dough.
"One, please," she said.
"Sure thing, but wouldn't you like a second to go with it?"
"If it's good."
Mau Mau took the mahua, which was wrapped in a bamboo leaf, and took a bite. It was freshly made and still soft and hot. She chewed carefully so as not to burn herself. Jinchi looked at her. "What, not going to share?"
"I'm testing it for poison,"
she said, deadpan. It was good that the bread was fresh, and there was enough for all of them. Too much, in fact, to wrap all in bamboo leaves. Instead, the shopkeeper gave her a rough-hewn sack, made of hemp fiber, of course, lining the inside with cheap paper to keep the grease from soaking through. Jinchi plucked one of the mahua out and took a bite. "It's all right," he declared. Frankly, if it had been better than what he normally ate, it would have been time to find a new royal chef.
"Do you really have time to be out here playing, Master Jinchi?"
Basen looked rather tired after all that happened at the papermaker's village. Having me out of the way for a while will give him a chance to rest. Basen was a very poor liar. It must have been taxing for him to pretend to be Jinchi's superior. In that respect, he wasn't so different from his father. As they walked, Mau Mau spotted a number of other interesting things. The farther west they went, the more animal husbandry there was, so dairy products became more available. She studied a shelf of just such items in a storehouse. An older woman who looked like a housewife was banking a fire in a stove. The main post in the kitchen bore a strange pattern. Every land had its different faiths. Here, it appeared they worshipped snakes, or so the pattern seemed to suggest. Jinchi raised an eyebrow at it.
"Excuse me," Mau Mau said to the woman.
"Yes?"
"Could we ask for a few of these? We can pay you."
They were apt to grow tired of portable rations after a while. Mau Mau wanted to indulge herself and her party, at least for the few days the fresh dairy products would last.
Which ones did you have in mind?"
The woman eyed Mau Mau and Jinchi closely.
"This, and those. Maybe 10 of each. And if you have anything else interesting, we'll take it."
"Just a second," the woman said, fetching the items off the shelf and putting them in a hemp package. "How about that?" She looked like she might drive a hard bargain, but she let them have the food at a surprisingly cheap price, and she even picked good, fresh items.
"I know we're imposing. I really appreciate this,"
Mau Mau said earnestly. The woman broke into a smile. "You never know when the gods might be watching. There's one right here, after all, she said, indicating the post. Mau Mau thought. She, of course, didn't buy it. She had nothing against that kind of belief. She only worried that the woman's generosity might get her taken advantage of.
So you worship a snake here? She noted.
That's right, the woman replied. Years when a white snake appears are bound to have a good harvest. Superstition it might be, but Jinchi's face darkened at the remark. He'd no doubt heard the stories about the White Lady. Maybe he had even been tasked with dealing with her. Mau Mau wished he would keep just a little more distance while she talked to the woman. What with his burn and his grim expression, the woman kept shooting him strange looks. Mau Mau had nothing against snakes, but the mention of white snakes specifically was bound to bring something of a frown to her face. She couldn't help wondering where the mysterious immortal had gone. It looks like you two are headed west. Best be careful, the woman said as she packaged the dairy delicately. There was more in there than Mau Mau had specifically ordered. A little something extra, perhaps, as a kindness.
Why's that? I hear there have been a lot of bandits along the highway that direction lately. Even the merchants don't go that way if they don't have to.
Ah, maybe she normally sold these provisions to the merchants. But with fewer customers than usual, better to give Mau Mau and Jinchi a bargain than not to sell them at all. And the free goods would get a few more things off her shelf.
I see. Thank you,
Mau Mau said.
Well, be careful.
Then she looked at Jinchi to indicate that they should be getting back. When they reached the inn, the smell of an aromatic tea wafted through the air. It was Basen, relaxing for a moment after having arranged the horses. When he saw Jinchi, he straightened up. The animals will be ready tomorrow morning, he reported. We'll have to use one of the local guides, though. He was referring to one of the cargo transport businesses that used horses to move goods. Fine, Jinchi said, slumping into a chair. Basen gave Mau Mau a look that obviously meant, hurry and make tea. So she shrugged and was about to get fresh hot water when Jinchi said, It's all right. I don't mind it lukewarm.
You're sure, sir?
If he said so, then fine. There was plenty of water still in the teapot. Mau Mau simply got some new leaves. We heard something about bandits, Jinchi said, sipping his tepid drink. Yes, sir. The same thing was mentioned to me. That's why we had to bring one of the guides with us as a condition of renting the horses. Banditry could take many forms. In this case, they seemed to be the type who wanted to collect a toll. If the party didn't run into them, well and good. But if they did, having someone along who knew the local situation would likely see them escape by simply paying a percentage of their cargo. Mau Mau looked at Jinchi and Basen. Both were effectively trained soldiers, and as government officials, they couldn't simply look the other way when it came to banditry. But they didn't have the forces here to exterminate the criminals either. Neither of them looked very happy about it. Mau Mau, for her part, simply hoped they wouldn't even see the brigands.